Welcome to Educators and Employers, virtual supporting talent with virtual and blended internships. We're so excited to have you guys with us today. See many familiar faces on the call, so welcome to everyone. For those of you who I have not had the chance to meet yet, virtually or in person, my name is Jessie Shook, and I'm the Director of Education and Workforce Connectivity at GLI, and we're so excited to have you all with us today to talk about this extremely important topic. As we have transitioned to this remote world of work, we have all kind of experienced the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. And for many companies, there's been a great increase in productivity. The work-life balance has been maybe more of a struggle for some of us. There's a lot of pros and cons to this new world of work, this new normal that we've adjusted to. But we have seen that many companies who were planning to offer internships have really struggled with how to make this happen in the virtual context. So today's event is all about addressing this issue. How do we continue to provide virtual or blended internships to ensure that our learners, our students, and our community have the opportunity to build key skills and experiences so that they're ready to enter the workforce and hit the ground running? We're going to hear from a panel of experts, both employers and educators, who've had to pivot, shift, experience their own unique challenges and overcome those with a variety of strategies, so they'll be able to share their insights with you. And then we'll finish out our event this morning in strategic breakout groups. Part of the objective of the Educators and Employers event series is to bring both partners to the table. Educators and employers are equally as important to building strong talent pipelines in our community. So we need to work together to address these challenges. Within the breakouts, each group will have a specific goal, and you'll have a facilitator that has a background in education and workforce development. And we'll work around key topics, and driving solutions to these topics related to things such as managing our interns in the virtual environment, diversifying student recruitment pipelines, and ensuring that we maintain connected to the universities within this virtual environment, universities and high schools. So it is my honor to kick us off today by welcoming our presenting sponsor, the Kentucky Lottery, who's a strong advocate for higher education and a key investor in the education of our students through the KEYS program. You know, many of us on this call likely utilize some of those KEYS dollars if we're from Kentucky. This provides very important financial aid to eligible Kentucky students. So it's my honor to welcome Chip Polston, Senior VP of Communications, PR, and Social Responsibility for the Kentucky Lottery, to kick us off. Chip?
Yes, Jessie, thank you very, very much. And again, the Kentucky Lottery really is proud to be a part of this gathering of educators and employers, although it may seem like kind of a weird synergy. Most of you probably know us from scratch-off tickets or big Powerball jackpots, and promoting education and workforce development, though, really is at the heart of what we do, because some 21 years ago, members of the General Assembly in Frankfurt decided to dedicate Kentucky Lottery proceeds to funding college scholarship and grant programs. And since then, the largest chunk of our proceeds, more than $3.8 billion with a B, $3.8 billion, have gone to fund programs to help Kentucky students attend college. To put this in perspective, 95 cents of every dollar of non-loan student aid awarded in Kentucky comes straight from the sale of a Kentucky Lottery ticket. And in those 20 years, 1 out of every 5 Kentucky residents has now received a college scholarship or grant paid for by lottery proceeds, which is something we're very proud of. Those proceeds, as Jessie indicated, have funded every dime of the popular KEYS scholarship ever awarded, and our proceeds also help fund the need-based college access program and Kentucky tuition grants. So in turn, both groups here today are really, really key to our mission. From the perspective of universities, it's providing funds to those scholarship and grant programs, and from the employer's perspective, it's helping raise the education level of Kentuckians to provide a better workforce. Really want to thank GLI for the opportunity for us to participate in the gathering. Today, we know Kentucky's most deserving students are really counting on us, and our mission of fueling imagination and funding education is more important than ever. Thanks so much and enjoy the day.
Thank you, Chip. And now it's my honor to welcome our panelists and our moderator, who are going to be essential in sharing their insights with us and getting our wheels turning as we move towards the breakout sessions later in the morning. I'll begin with Ilka Bach, the Director of Engineering Career Development at the University of Kentucky, go Cats. And then we have Angela Branford Stevenson, Senior Human Resource Managers at Beam Centauri. Welcome to Amanda McGee, Senior Learning Design Professional of IT Learning Services at Humana. Matt Reel, Director or Associate Director of Career Development at Bellarmine University. And last but not least, our moderator, Tanel Smith, Manager of Workforce and Industry Programs at GLI. Welcome to each of you.
Thank you so much, Jesse. As Jesse mentioned, my name is Tanel Smith, and I'm the Manager of Workforce and Industry Programs at GLI. Definitely want to start by just thanking all of our panelists for being with us today. I'm so excited to moderate such an important conversation and hear more about what's happening at your organizations. I want to start by saying that we will do a panel discussion first, and then we'll have some time for Q&A after the panel discussion. So if you have some questions that you think of, please just utilize the chat function, and then we'll follow up with those questions after the panel. So this question is more geared towards Angela and Amanda. Can you describe your internship program and the changes that you've had to make since COVID?
Yeah, I can go first.
Perfect.
Or Angela, do you want to go?
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Okay. Well, hey everybody, I'm Amanda McGee. I lead the technology intern program for Humana, and I've been with Humana for 13 years now, and I've been leading the intern program for just the past 2 years. And so as someone that kind of just stepped into this role, being able to pivot and do something completely different this year really, wasn't too crazy for me. Last year, our interns, and every year before that, came to Louisville, and Humana paid for their housing. Typically, the interns live in the Galt House apartments in downtown Louisville. So this year, when COVID hit, we decided that we weren't going to cancel our intern programs, and we have more than one. We have an actuarial intern program at Humana. We also have a finance and accounting intern program, and we have a graduate program and an analytics intern program. So we decided as a collective group that we were going to pivot to a 100% virtual option or approach, and we really, I think the key to our success this past summer was just early and frequent communication with the interns. So as soon as we got word that COVID was a pandemic and people needed to stay at home and the lockdowns ensued, I started communicating with them. So I sent them emails and, just was very transparent that we didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but I did provide them with the possible scenarios. Either they were going to come to Louisville as planned in May and live here for 12 weeks in the summer, working full-time as an intern, or they would maybe work from home for the first 6 weeks of their internship and then come to Louisville for the remaining 6 weeks. Or the third possible scenario, they would just work from home for the entire summer. And that latter option is what ended up happening. So we just, like I said, we've communicated often and we're very transparent. I held a Q&A session with them before they started so that they could ask questions and all be in the same virtual room together. And we also offered a couple of prep workshops 2 weeks before they started to really help them prepare for a virtual internship. Many of the interns had never worked anywhere before. They'd never worked for a Fortune 100 company like Humana. And so in that workshop, we covered things like, how do I meet people in a virtual environment? How do I take care of my well-being? How do I actually get my work done from home with all these distractions? How do I stand out from behind a screen? How do I get noticed? How do I communicate with people virtually? How do I give feedback? How do I receive feedback? And so I think all of that set us up for a successful summer. We also had a number of virtual coffee chats and personal effectiveness workshops. So the coffee chats were led by various people in IT, so senior leaders on down to architects and engineers, project managers. So, having those frequent interactions in the form of workshops and coffee chats helped to integrate the interns and help them to meet people. I stood up a social committee. We had an intern social committee consisting of interns who volunteered to plan social virtual events. So those are just a few things that we did to pivot to a totally virtual intern program this summer.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. So I'm Angela, and I am the senior HR manager here at Beams and Torrey. I've been with the company about 5 years. This actually was my first time leading the internship program, so what a year to start my task off. One of the things that was a huge change for us is that we have 5 sites across Kentucky, and so how do we leverage all those sites and give the best experience? And then also our headquarters is in Chicago. And then given the climate of COVID at different states, we had to adjust accordingly. So our model was more of our Chicago interns were totally virtual. So of course, we shifted from that face-to-face to totally virtual. And in Kentucky, what we did was there was a hybrid version where parts of your internship might have started off virtual, but eventually all of the interns were able to actually come on site to their respective locations. One of the biggest things that we did see was communication is key, right? We had so many interns who really, were curious, like, okay, are we gonna have to wear masks? Or, they had so many questions and concerns. We also had an outpouring of people who were reaching out to us who had accepted other internships who said, hey, my internship with this company got canceled. Do you guys still have openings? So we're kind of balancing between being respectful of the ones we have, but making sure that we're able to provide them the best possible experience. So with that being said, some of the things that we felt was really important was that prep work, right? So similar to what Amanda said, that constant communication, not only with them, but also with our managers, because, a lot of them were working remotely. They didn't quite know how that was going to be, making sure we had a clear outlined project plan, right? So what are the deliverables going to be? One of the other pieces we thought was going to be great that we did was having a buddy system. So assigning that person kind of a buddy or a mentor that they can touch base on a weekly touch point. And then, what we call is kind of like a virtual coffee. So making sure we have established touch points with everyone so that people are feeling engaged. Another thing that kind of happened that we started to see was that, how do we get them training? How do we get them the things that they need? So we saw ourselves leaning more to things like LinkedIn Learning. So platforms that we hadn't previously used. Definitely, we also started to have lunch and learns. And so those were virtual. So it was really actually a really great experience because, they got time with the executive leadership team to talk about the company overall. So they learned all aspects of the business. So touch points they normally wouldn't get in an internship until the end. They actually got to do presentations to various groups. So definitely, I think, if I had to give any advice on whether it's virtual or a hybrid version, is the prep work, right? Just making sure that you're prepared, that you have touch points for communications, and that you're flexible. Because, one thing you could say is, okay, we're going to go here, we're going to go to this plant and do this tour. And then they said, hey, well, you can only have 5 people. So just being able to flex and just, be able to adjust your plans would be key for us. And I think that constant feedback loop, I think, would be the other piece that I would say has definitely changed since COVID. So there were regular touch points where I reached out to the interns directly, whether they gave an anonymous survey or face-to-face, what's working, and even better if. So just even having those conversations, people will give you great ideas. And so we were able to kind of shift to make their experiences better. And the same things with the managers and the mentors that were happening. So overall, it's just, I'd say flexibility and prep work.
Thank you so much. You both raised really good points on why it's necessary to pivot those programs and not just eliminate them. You all made some really, really successful pivots during this time and still making internships possible for students. But as we all know, this is a two-sided relationship. So one end is the employers making sure that these opportunities are still possible, but also on the other end, making sure that students know about these opportunities and students are still gravitating towards these opportunities as well. So Ilka and Matt, if you don't mind to maybe speak to how your students or how you shifted your support strategies for your students in this unique environment.
Yeah, I can start unless you want to, Matt. Yeah, so this was really a, of course it was for everyone. It was an unprecedented time. We were definitely wondering how we're even going to do this. And I think one of the big things that when we started working from home and the university closed to on-campus learning in March, one thing that I think we were really trying hard to get through to our students is that we are not closed. The physical campus is closed. We are still here for you. And so just like Angela and Amanda already mentioned, lots of communication to these students. We ended up, reaching out one-on-one to a lot of our students. We offered office hours and kind of lunch and learns. And for those who were in co-ops in the spring, we tried to offer things after work hours so that they could focus on their work during the workday. Initially, those were really not very well attended, and we had real trouble convincing students, no, we are here for you. So please take advantage. This is what we do. So it definitely was a process in reaching out. One other thing that we did was we also reached out to all of our graduates, our May graduates, around graduation time and shortly after. So the university had a whole call campaign where they literally called every single student on campus. Every one of the 30,000 students got a call. For our office, we called our recent graduates or our upcoming graduates and made sure that they knew that we were here to support them and that we wanted to meet with them one-on-one through Zoom or other tools, phone or email. But it was definitely a process. And one thing that I've noticed this semester, so when in-person teaching started again in August, we were wondering, so are students going to show up in our offices? Well, that has not really been the case, but they are much more open to reaching out to us via phone or email or make appointments and meet through Zoom or Teams. So we've definitely had a lot of traffic from students, and I think we're all kind of getting used to this. I think there was definitely a barrier where people thought, oh, the university is closed, ILCA must not be working. Well, ILCA is working. And so it's definitely been a process. And then in addition to that, we try to get into all the classrooms. So we work with the faculty to allow that, so that they will allow us to either come in for just 5 minutes or to come in for more time. And then this semester, we have a team of 3 in the College of Engineering. We're offering 35 different workshops to our students. A lot of them are in the evenings, but some are over lunch or just during the day on different topics, what Angela mentioned about LinkedIn Learning. So we're trying to help the students with their resumes in group sessions as well as one-on-one, but we definitely have upped our number of workshops. And so far they've been pretty well received by the students.
At Bellarmine, I would echo a lot of what Ilka said. It's very similar being in the education sector. I will say our focus was probably on the development and dissemination of just education and updates to policy as we were reacting to just what Angela and Amanda were mentioning as they're kind of determining what the workforce looks like, we're reacting and how our students can engage with that. And so that was just a collective, sustained collaborative process of working internally with our academic administration, our health services, our communications and marketing, developing our own plan and strategy for uniquely how's Bellarmine going to respond. And then looking outward to like my colleagues like Ilka and across the country. There were great organizations like the Career Leadership Collective who met daily with panels of how are you hanging in there? To NACE, there's also a great national sort of internship listserv where people can share information, and a lot of us are on that. And so people were able to create language, create documents that we could share and manipulate and meet the needs of our particular student.
Matt, are you there?
I am, I'm sorry, is it?
Okay.
Am I in the dreaded like bandwidth? Like, so here's another, is like, do students have the technology to be able to do remote internships? I'll just. Education and dissemination on new policies, probably.
Thank you so much. You definitely raise a good point. All of the things can be done necessarily on both ends to make sure that, you know, students will be driven to participate in these internships, and that these internships also exist, but also focusing on the student individually, holistically, is also really important to make sure that they have access at home in this virtual environment as well. So in that sense, can we talk about, and anyone can answer this from your perspective, because I know sometimes we can be on our own islands. Our educators are here, our employees are here, but it's so important for us to work together, because when we talk about it, a lot of the issues that each area is struggling in, both areas can kind of come together to combat those issues as well. So from your perspective, why do you think it's important for both the employers and the student support professionals to make sure that these pipelines are sustained in this remote environment?
Well, from the employer's perspective, I would say that without the supply of students, we're going to have a talent problem. You know, our intern program is one of our greatest HR successes, and so if we don't have an intern program anymore, then we have a gap in our talent pipeline.
I would second that. I will say, you know, one thing I did find really critical is that communication. While we've been very much partnered with UK because of our Beam Institute, just that connection overall is important. You know, I would give a shout out to Ilka, who definitely has helped us stay connected and understand some of the challenges that students are having, because that has also helped us to pivot as well. You know, and then two, you know, one thing we think may be working, we may find out is it's a better way to do it, right? You know, and that's how do we reach out to those students, right? And so we may assume that, you know, handshake or a board will get that message out there. And we're finding that, you know, a lot of times, how do we get in the classroom to that point? How do we get 5 minutes to speak at a class and talk about our opportunities? You know, how do we connect to some of the counselors? How do we give our time, you know, resume building or doing mock interviews? So I think, you know, just having that two-way communication is essential, definitely because, you know, interns are the pipeline to most organizations. That's that new thought process, diversity and everything else that comes into a company.
In this relationship, Ilka and Matt, if you can speak to this, within this relationship, what has been the biggest challenge in supporting students through this pipeline?
Hear me. I'm sorry if I'm robotic or whatever. I would say really it's probably mental health. Their safety, of course, that making sure however they're performing these internships, it's in a safe way. But I would also say mental health. You're thinking about students that are still developing some of those coping mechanisms and decision making. And, you know, it's one thing to say COVID, but I think we also in our community are dealing with issues of social justice and racial justice. There's a presidential election. Students have a lot of stressors of work and school and managing where they're living. And so not that we all aren't experiencing those, but I think students are in a transitional, like developmental state. And so just checking in on them, making sure they're okay and that apathy isn't developing for them has really been, I think, our focus of Ilka mentioned it, it's calling every one of them if we have to. If it's trying to check in and communicate, that's really been probably the biggest challenge, honestly.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. The communication has been, has been different, and it certainly was a learning experience for all of us. And I think that's been one of my challenges because, I'm on campus every day. I work in the College of Engineering where students have study spaces right next to our office suite. And so a lot of this kind of communication has gotten lost as you run into someone in the hallway or in the staircase. So that's been difficult. And I know, like Matt said, that's difficult for the students as well, not to have, just to hop into somebody's office, which they now can for some staff, but not for all. So that's been really, really tough. And I wanted to hop onto what Amanda and Angela said too about just, sustaining this pipeline is so important. I mean, I'm old enough to have been around during the last recession and also in the College of Engineering. And I, and kudos to Amanda and Angela, because the companies back then, over 10 years ago that kind of committed to looking forward and looking ahead were the ones that were really successful, or much more successful overall, when the economy did recover. Because if you think of a student life cycle being 4 years, maybe 5 years if they co-op, or it takes them a little longer, there's not a lot of institutional memory on the student's part. So if a company kind of contracts for 3 years or 2 years, it takes you all, so many years to build up that reputation as an employer of choice, because there aren't people like myself who were around 10 years ago and can I can remind the students, but it doesn't matter as much what I say as what their peers say. So kudos to you to really, thinking ahead and thinking of these interns as those future full-time employees.
Yeah, Tanel, if I could just real quick add on to what Ilka was saying, because I think that is, hitting it right on the head, and thinking about, as Amanda mentioned, you're trying to build customized talent that fits your specific needs for whatever, if it's actuarial, accounting. And that takes real investment of time, of money, and of knowledge. And so if you can design a program, as I was saying, to partner and cover all three of those, whether it's connecting with faculty or being faculty, having representatives from your organization be faculty themselves in your programs, to kind of establish and like I said, build that customized talent is really the way to get it done. And I think, now more than ever, especially recruiting, for us, we just got a generous gift to do some recruitment of diverse talent into in-demand majors, specifically students of color into those majors, so that then we're producing at the back end talent to support the workforce of the future. And but again, that takes an investment. And so I think we're here, and maybe we're slower to adjust sometimes than private industry can be, but I think we have the effort to try to do that. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Matt. And you bring up a really good point. You talked about this in the beginning. Within these pipelines, making sure that, students' mental health are intact and they feel good even being home, but just ensuring that students are safe and feel safe. Young adults, as we all know, tend to gravitate pressurely with each other, or also they want to, please a boss or please a teacher or professor, or, someone who's a mentor, even if they are not comfortable. So can you speak to how, if, I guess, especially Amanda and Angela, in these blended or in-person elements, how are you ensuring that students feel safe and are safe? And Ilka and Matt, you can speak to this as well, but just really want to talk around how we're ensuring that students are safe and also feel safe in this environment, as you mentioned, not only just in a pandemic, but also issues that we are experiencing here as well.
Yeah, and I guess I can start there. I mean, I think, kind of goes back to everything I'm talking about is, how are we communicating? Are we asking the right questions? If you're pairing them, one of the things we did, we paired them with a buddy, someone they had something in common with that established another relationship. Is that person getting the same pulse from that person? So that we're trying to provide a safe environment where they feel that they can share if they're not feeling safe. Are we doing the right thing? I think the biggest thing too is in addition to that, mental health, is the company doing the right thing from a social justice standpoint? What is the climate within the culture here? Making sure that we're having that same conversation with all our employees. And then I think the other piece that, I've noticed as a mom of a college age student as well, too, is that social aspect, the fact that they're yearning and missing that piece as well. And so within this new environment, how can we provide opportunities for them to socially interact with each other in a safe way? So I think all those pieces are the things that we've tried to focus on throughout our internships and within the company as a whole.
Yeah, and we also have mentors assigned to our interns. From a career development standpoint, the mentors help them, kind of navigate Humana and build relationships with them. Last summer, when the intern program was in person in Louisville, we had one student who was having a mental health crisis, and I think it was the second week of the internship when he asked if he could go home, go back to Florida. And we had never dealt with that before. We had never had an intern that wasn't in person. So we, worked with this intern's leader. The leader was okay with him finishing his internship from home, and so we let him go back home to be, near his family, which was a much better situation for him, because when the interns when we had an in-person program in Louisville, we, matched the interns up with each other in the apartments, and so there were 4 of them living together, essentially with strangers in an apartment in a city that they, didn't know and didn't know anyone. So I think just listening and having empathy for how people respond to, all these forces, I guess. Yeah, I don't know if that speaks to the question, but
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
We will transition into the more of a Q&A. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask the panelists, feel free to utilize the chat feature. One of the questions that I did see already come through are, what skills would you expect of an incoming intern that they are often lacking?
I don't mind. Oh, sorry, Angela, are you gonna?
No, you go ahead. I might just piggyback off your answer.
Well, it's good because I'm gonna piggyback off of consider communication and some of, I think, the assumptions we probably make when they enter the workforce. And I would just put something simply as, how do they understand email as part of workflow? And that seems really basic, but you might expect them to have some skill there, and they might not come with very good email etiquette skills, because they're looking at it very transactionally on campus maybe, but not integrated into the workflow. That's one thing I would say.
Yeah, and I can add to that for sure. Definitely, we've been doing some professional development with the interns, and just speaking events about email etiquette, texting. So I'm very open with the interns. Hey, if you need anything, feel free to text me. This is my cell phone number. Just even how do you compose the correct text to a person who, you know, is in a company, right? You know, how do you word things? So I would definitely say, you know, email etiquette, and then following up. So, you know, if you are having a conflict, or, you know, someone asks you a question that you maybe not been able to do, they just say, hey, I've had problems. Can you help out? You know, it's because what I've noticed is sometimes instead of answering the question, they kind of just ignore it. So definitely email communication, and just the proper etiquette when you're dealing with whether anything in written form would be a skill that I think is opportunity for a lot of students.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make, Matt. We saw more issues with our SummerWorks interns not responding to emails, not acknowledging emails, and not being on Microsoft Teams, like not even being logged in at all. Which made it tough for me to communicate with them. But they're mostly the high school interns. Didn't see that so much with the college interns, but I would say that as far as experience that we're looking for that sometimes candidates are lacking is having, you know, coding experience. I wouldn't say the majority of our intern positions, but maybe not quite half. Not quite half of our internship roles are within the software engineering space in IT, and so we do want them to come in with some foundational knowledge of coding. So knowing a couple or several software coding languages already, and you know, demonstrating that they have a passion for learning and demonstrating that they have a passion for software development really helps them stand out. So sometimes that can be lacking in our candidates. We've had over 1,000 applicants so far to the 2021 summer intern program within technology, which is the most we've ever had. So I don't know if it's just that we're getting a good name, or if it's the remote environment has opened things up so much more. So now, you know, you don't have to move to Louisville, Kentucky for a summer if you don't want to in order to be an intern with us.
I'm going to read this next question word for word so I don't decipher any any of the question. So we're a small nonprofit who would love to offer additional support like direct mentors, etc. And also it's a priority that we find a way to stipend our practicum students to make access to opportunities more equitable. Any suggestions on partnerships we can make to help provide some additional support like mentorship? And are there any opportunities for us to procure funding to allow for us to stipend students?
I can just speak to what's happening at Bellarmine. And again, I continue with the low bandwidth warning, so I apologize, y'all. We in the past have worked hard to secure some grant funding because we noticed that in nonprofits, there's a lot of great work that happens and a lot of really broad, some breadth and depth to what students can do in terms of projects and outcomes and deliverables. So with, you know, incredibly generous support from like the James Graham Brown Foundation, the Ogle Foundation, we've worked to develop paid nonprofit internships throughout the summer in Louisville and Southern Indiana. And so I would say just make sure you're connecting with your, you know, local institutions, career services, not just Bellarmine, but please Bellarmine, because we're working on things like that. We recognize that it's hard for a nonprofit to compete with an accounting firm. To pay students to attract that talent. But often the experience can be just as good, if not better, at the nonprofit. So, you know, connect with your career services professional. They might have a program in place on their campus to help you.
And I'll hop in real quick. There are also ways to engage students, and I think that may be coming up in one of the breakouts or in a number of the breakouts for a smaller buy-in, so to speak. There's UK partners with an organization called Parker Dewey that offers micro internships, and these are paid, but those could be projects that are only, you know, 20 or 40 hours in scope. So if there's like a small project, Parker Dewey helps kind of connect these companies that need a project done with students that are kind of looking more for smaller projects along the gig economy, so to speak. And then in engineering, and I don't know how common this is in other majors because I'm barely ever getting out of this office, it seems. But we have, our engineering students have to complete senior design projects, for example. Those are group projects, you know, they are either a semester or a year long, depending on the major. And the students are doing real technical work, and we love industry practitioners and partners to give us these kind of tasks, or give the students the tasks and the problems. And those tend to be, it changes from university to university and major to major, I'm sure. But generally speaking, those projects are free, and they often allow kind of the companies to look at how is that team doing on their project and who's the leader on that team, and then certainly approach them for, so again, these are usually seniors, but then for full-time employment opportunities or other ways to engage with them. So there are ways to do this cheaper.
Thank you so much, Matt and Ilka. I think we have time for one more question. So I'll ask, how has the change in mode of internships started any internal conversations about more remote work positions being offered in the future? And I would even add for more, because Amanda, you touched on this a little bit, for more remote internships being offered in the future.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think it's definitely the way that we're going. You know, previously, Humana IT has been up against the big tech companies in terms of converting our interns to full-time associates. So, like for example, last summer we had an in-person program because we didn't have a pandemic, and we lost a handful of our top interns to Amazon and Microsoft. So I don't know that we'll see that happening as much in the future, because I think, you know, I don't know that this is true. This is not based on data or research, but my gut tells me that students have probably bumped up stability over and above status. And even title when it comes to, or maybe even money when it comes to, you know, making their decision for the ones that could go work for, you know, the big tech companies versus Humana, the healthcare giant. So I think it really will change the landscape in terms of the type of talent that we're able to attract, because I do feel that we're going to have a huge remote workforce when all of this is said and done, if it's ever said and done. But we don't want to forget our Louisville, our U of L, and our Bellarmine and our IU candidates, because, you know, Humana is still committed to you know, helping to make a difference in the community by bringing in top talent from our local universities and colleges. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and to add to what Amanda was saying, I would say we're in a unique situation because, you know, half of our workforce is already working remotely due to the pandemic, but then we also have our plants where people are coming in every day. So you kind of have those two worlds. So definitely I've seen a shift, and, you know, even kind of as we're continue to hire and look for interns, you know, that option for remote work, or even kind of a hybrid for those people. And that's something we typically hadn't offered before. You know, definitely I've also seen an increased amount of students who have graduated who are actually coming and applying for internships with the hopes, probably to more so Amanda's point of that'll get them full time, that stability. We see that, you know, this is an industry that is still thriving through the pandemic. And so we've seen an increase in, you know, more applicants that we probably wouldn't get for an internship program. And I definitely think being able to have the option to do remotely has helped. But I also think the fact that we've been allowed to have that blended experiences for people who want both, because there's some people who are going crazy being at home, and then there's people who love it, right? And then there's those people who like a little bit of both. And so, you know, just being able to adapt to kind of just the changing workforce. It'll be really interesting to see, you know, if you think about the money, the time people spend in work locations. You know, I even laugh, I'm at the Frankfurt location and half the people aren't even in the building. It's probably 5 of us each day. So it's kind of like, it's a different world. You know, so it'll be interesting to see how long this continues, but if anything, it's changed people's thought process, that things that people thought previously could only be done face-to-face, they're realizing that you can actually do that remotely and the world goes on and it can be successful. So that's what I have to say.
Well, thank you so much, Angela and Amanda, Matt, and Ilka. I really, really appreciate you all for sharing your insights with us today. We will definitely utilize this information that we've heard to springboard us into a discussion around key topics related to developing strong talent pipelines. So when you all registered, you chose a breakout group that resonated most with your interest or needs. So in just a minute, you will see a message pop up on your screen to move into your breakout groups where you will connect with expert educators and employers, leaders that will lead a discussion around the topic that you selected at registration. So again, each group will have a moderator, and then once we come back, we'll spend some time in our breakout session, and then we'll come back to do some reporting out. So if you wait just a second, you'll receive a pop-up. Thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Welcome back, everyone. That's always a fun experience of breakout groups when you feel like you're in an alternate universe and you're being zapped into one group. And I was in the wrong breakout group initially. So sorry to all my friends that were in that breakout that I got zapped out mid-sentence. But it's good to see you all back here in our large group. Excited to hear what you all came up with. I'm going to ask each moderator to take about 60 seconds, just very briefly, high level, what was the goal of your group and the biggest takeaway? And I'm going to go ahead and actually start with our group. And Sam, I hope that you made it back because I want to pick on you here because I had never heard of what you were talking about. Would you mind to share with us? And I'm looking for Sam and I'm not.
I'm
here.
here.
There you are. Down at the bottom. Would you mind to share what you just mentioned to our group? We were the liberal arts major group and how that aligns with career pathways. And Sam mentioned a really interesting feature of ONET at the close of our discussion, and I think it could be a great benefit to all of you. So go ahead, Sam.
Sure, thanks, Jesse. So one thing, the question came up is how do we, for liberal arts programs, talk to students, talk to graduates about career pathways and what their program of study could lead into. And, you know, I was mentioning to the group about the SIPSOC crosswalk. So each program in post-secondary has a CIP code. I know the C is classification. The IP are not coming to me. So if any post-secondary folks want to jump on with what a SIP code is. But each program of study has a SIP code, and those SIP codes translate in ONET to SOC codes, standard occupational classification codes. So what we do a lot with our students and our graduates is kind of do the mapping of that SIP code to the SOC codes or SIPSOC crosswalk to show them these are potential fields you could go into. This is how the skills that you're learning in your program can translate into these career pathways. So that's one of the things that we do, because a lot of our programs, or most of our programs, are very career specific. But when you get into that career, there's so many different occupations. So we have to kind of broaden our students' minds into, you know, you think you're going to do this, but these are also things that you could do as well. So we kind of go through that crosswalk with them.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. Tanel, I'll call on you next. You want to chime in with what your group discussed?
Yeah. So my group was managing interns, and our goal was to identify the best ways to engage and communicate with active interns. I would say that the biggest takeaways were just to implement some opportunity for the interns to also be able to provide feedback, whether that be feedback within their cohort or feedback with their supervisor or whoever is managing them in general, or just where also one good point that Angela brought up was not only are, you know, the interns being managed and supervised and evaluated, but so is the supervisor, and so are the people that, are in charge of the work that they are doing. So hearing that feedback, whether that be through surveys or, through one-on-ones or, kind of an exit interview or something like that, giving the interns the opportunity to talk about their experiences, and maybe even it's more frequently than that. And then another point was just helping interns to understand their skills and the skills that they do have, obviously related to the internship, but also related to their career goals. We talked a little bit about whenever you get into your first role, as we say, big girl, big boy roles. You don't want to land in that role and say, where did I go wrong? So really just offering those opportunities for students to be able to learn, and really using that as a value add, which is what we talked about, using that leverage as a value add to really entice students to want to participate in internships so that they can really explore the things that they're interested in and know upfront, oh, this is not, what I thought it would be, so they don't get into their first, they don't reach their first role before they figure that out. So those are some big takeaways from my group.
Great. Thanks so much, Tanel. Joy, would you mind to pop in with what your group talked about?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about diversifying talent pipelines and spoke a lot about reaching out to younger students at an earlier age and figuring out how we can expose them to different opportunities. And then we discussed, of course, as far as just kind of like this, touched on like some of the civil unrest and how our businesses are operating around them, and being sensitive to like our minority population at this time, and figuring out things that we need to do within our own departments. I forget her name, please excuse me, I'm so sorry for that, but the lady from Bellarmine talked about how President Susan Donovan has done a lot as far as reaching out to the minority students at this time. And so I thought that was really great, and like how the leadership has really adapted to like this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Joy. Kristen, we'll call on you next.
Trying to unmute. Sure. So our group was talking about project-based learning, and our goal was to identify relevancy, purpose, and effectiveness of project-based learning. So we kind of started with like, what is project-based learning? And I think kind of the definition that our group was operating off of was a project that students work on that build those skills that we need, both technical and essential skills towards that. And so the most relevant point that we talked about was just kind of a real strong connection between somebody at the education institution that has the best relationship with the student, whether that be a teacher or an advisor, and with the employer on kind of what the growth goals are for the student and what their strengths and weaknesses may already be. We talked a lot about students needed to be excited and eager and coming into the internship, which will happen naturally if it's connected to something they are interested in doing. And then also the need for kind of the critical thinking and problem solving skills. So asking properly prepared questions, doing the research before you ask the questions, kind of, how to do that. And so I think that's a growth area between how do employers and educators work together on identifying strengths and weaknesses of the student to help ensure those are being built through the internship experience.
Great, thanks, Kristen. And last but not least, Regina.
Yes, our group discussed, and we could have talked probably another like an hour about this, but we talked about student recruitment, and I guess the biggest takeaway was that students really need a very strong, especially during COVID and everything's virtual, a very strong digital presence, and we need to be able to work with our students to be able to make sure they understand the value of LinkedIn and how to use it. And so, there was even talk about even students, maybe juniors and seniors in high school, it might be very helpful before they even go on to start thinking about LinkedIn and how to use it. And then the other thing Joe Franklin talked about in our group is that, we've got a lot of students that graduate from college and maybe they haven't had all the internships that other students have had, but there's sort of a break between what they've learned in college and how that translates to the workforce. And so we kind of need to make sure that we work with students and help them realize, you know, what skills they need and how that translates to the workforce. And so I think the bottom line is work with students to make sure they have that strong digital presence and that they're aware of all the opportunities with using LinkedIn.
Great, thanks, Regina. These are all really amazing topics that we could have a whole nother educators and employers event around. So be on the watch in the future for our next event series. We also have a Workforce Connections event coming up on the 29th of October, just a month out, related to pipelines for manufacturing and logistics. So I hope many of you might be able to join us on that call as well. I want to thank all of our panelists, Angela, Matt, Amanda, Ilka. Thank you all so much for being here. Tanel, thank you for moderating. Also want to be sure we call out the Kentucky Lottery again as our presenting sponsor and a significant investor in higher education in this community, helping us to build strong talent pipelines. I did put a link to our Greater Louisville talent page in the chat. There's a number of resources there, including an internship toolkit that has just been revised to include supporting virtual and blended internships. So on that link, you'll see supporting internships is one of the blocks there. Click on that block and there's a button to download your toolkit. And then the last thing I want to mention is that Tanel and my colleague Bradley and I are here and available for you all as both educators and employers to help you make connections. We have links on that site at that very same URL where you're able to click hire interns or recent grads. And then if you're an educator, you can also request employer connectivity. If you're struggling to get in touch with a certain company or with a certain educational institution, we're a resource for you and we're happy to make those connections. So again, thank you all for your time today. I hope you're able to enjoy this fall weather and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.